It's something that we as spectators of football games love to look at on the scoreboard, the home and the visitors plastered on a device to identify the information about each team. But have you ever thought about where the word visitors or sometimes guests comes from? If you have, sit back and listen to Timothy Brown of footballarchaeology.com as he fills us in on this tale of how the visitors and guests came to be on the scoreboard. And it's all coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history, and welcome to another Tuesday where we get to welcome in our guest, Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, Darren. Thank you. Always good to be here chatting with you about old football stuff.
Yes, old football stuff, and we're going to be definitely talking about that today. And you know, since you are a guest, you're here on Pigskin Dispatch. I guess you're my visitor, not my opponent. So I think that'll maybe lead into some of the topic of what you're going to talk about today from one of your recent tidbits. Yeah,
so that is a beautiful segue.
Not very imaginative.
Yes. So this one, I just think it's really fun. I mean, I like, part of what I like about football is the evolution of words and terminology. And, you know, my most recent book was, basically about that topic. And so this is one, it got started with, I had come across a story probably 3-4 years ago about Harvard. There's a professor at Harvard who, when they built Harvard Stadium and they put up the scoreboard, it said Harvard and then opponent. And, he just didn't like the term opponent. He just felt like these are our guests. And so he wanted them to change the terminology. And he was like, by then he was a dean. So kind of what he said happened, and so they changed the terminology to guest and, or visitor, so even now, like, I went out and searched, a bunch of different, all the scoreboard manufacturers and they're, unless it's a digital one where they can put in whatever name of the visiting team is, the typical scoreboard will be like home and away, or it's the home team's name and then visitor or guest. And so opponent just isn't there anymore. So this guy, and this is back, 1905 or something like that, that he finally got the thing changed, but it was this one guy's opinion, and basically it's kind of proliferated throughout football and probably all kinds of other
I think all sports because yeah. I can remember when I was a kid in grade school, we had an old scoreboard, the old, dial clock type of our scoreboard, and had but it had, I'm pretty sure it had home and it had guests on it. I guess I never really thought about it, because now today you always see, visitors or away as probably the common thing, but those are actually kind of polite and welcoming things, I guess, as opponents or, the idiots from across town or whatever else you're going to put on there.
And those were the days when oftentimes after the game, the two teams would sit down and have dinner together. So, they were supposed to be treated as guests, and so, it's just, it was kind of a different time. And especially like in the Ivies, it was more of a gentleman's sort of thing than perhaps even it is there today. But yeah, so, it took us back to a bygone era. Right. But the other thing about that then was, so I'd had this story sitting in my head for like 4 years. And then it was like, well, this isn't enough to do a tidbit on. I mean, I've got to connect it to something else. And so then I came across the story of Lehigh and Lafayette, who are, bitter rivals. And in the 1959 game, it was at Lehigh. Both teams were 4-4 coming in, though Lehigh was favored. But as the game progressed, Lehigh did not treat Lafayette as guests. They treated them as something beneath an opponent. And, because Lehigh was unexpectedly losing, some of their fans apparently got a hold of pears and apples and had them in their pockets or whatever. They were out there in a very cold, last game of the season, cold weather. And they started flinging them at the up into the Lafayette stands, and then later on, lettuce and cabbages and apparently a few bottles, went Lafayette's way as well. And as that was happening, Lehigh was falling further and further behind on the field, and so then the last thing was that Lehigh Lafayette wins the game 28-6, and they end up. The Lehigh fans went out onto the field to protect the goalposts so that Lafayette could not tear them down. Because, back then, fans tore down the goalposts all the time. They were wooden. They weren't as secured into the ground as they are now. And then plus, enough teams hadn't been sued yet for people being injured by falling goalposts. So the home team didn't protect them as well as they do nowadays. But anyways, so that was kind of a riot, bunch of fights ensued, and so there was a time where there were tensions between the Lehigh and Lafayette fans. But one of the cool things about that story then was that a day or two after I published it, I get an email from a guy who played in the game. And so he and I are, we'll be connecting and, chatting in the near term, but he sent me some information, and I did another, one of the tidbits of late was one about the kind of an era of using rubber footballs. And there was talk about rubber footballs replacing the leather. And so this guy, Mike, became a Big East official. And so, he ended up, part of the story that I tell in that is one of the stories that he sent me, in a document that he had produced. Nice. So anyways, we're going to get together and chat a little bit, but it's one of the fun things about reading these things is, that oftentimes I hear from the children or the grandchildren of people, that I write about. But in this case, it's, somebody who's out there playing on the field that day. So, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. Now, is Lehigh and Lafayette, is that the longest they played the most times of any two opponents in college football history? Am I thinking right? Okay.
Yeah, they've played most often. Back in like the 1890s, they play twice a year. So that's part of why they went ahead of everybody else.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think they've played every year, but perhaps there was a gap somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Great story. And it's great that you get some great feedback from folks like that too, especially somebody that played in the game. That's really cool. So yeah, very, very nicely done. Well researched, just like everything that you do is. And you have such interesting things that come out each and every night in your tidbits, Tim. And folks, I'm sure. Well, we know they appreciate you're getting some responses back, and maybe if you could share with the listeners here how they too can partake in reading some of your tidbits, that'd be a great thing.
Yeah. So the best thing or the easiest thing is to just go to my site, footballarchaeology.com, and just subscribe. And then every night you'll get an email at 7 Eastern. It shows up in your inbox. And then, I have some people clearly, the vast majority of people read it that night, or at least they open it that night, decide if they want to read it or not. But, there's others, they let them pile up to the weekend, and then, they'll go through them because I can just, the number of hits that I get or email opens, I can tell that the system tracks that for me. So anyways, that's the best thing. I post on post on Threads now. I post on Substack app, and I am still posting on Twitter that has now been named X. So we'll see how long that lasts.
All right, Tim. Well, we thank you very much, and we will talk to you again next Tuesday.
Very good. Thank you.
We're taking a peek over at the chains and the down marker. It's 4th and long. We're going to have to punt the ball and get on out of here, but we'll have another series tomorrow for your football history headlines, so be sure to tune in. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast. Pigskindispatch.com is a proud affiliate of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of sports yesteryear.